Now, for one main problem with Skylanders is that they are toys. Their figurines are designed in a way to where kids will want to play as them because they look like toys, they feel like toys, they are effectively action figures. But unfortunately, just like all other action figure lines, it means that any single Skylander with enough force and brutality poured into it can easily snap off. The glue can melt and wear away over time to make it so that then joints slip right out. Sure, Skylanders can be quite easily designed since there are small little cuts in their body which allow joints like arms to be slotted inside and then with a little bit of additional glue placed onto it. Unless you start twisting the arm in specific directions, it's not going to come right out. It's a bit like one of those sockets where it just kind of eats in and then it can't be pulled back out again. You'll see what I'm talking about via a diagram because visuals is the easiest way to show and not tell, so to say. But regardless, that doesn't stop certain Skylanders from notoriously being incredibly fragile, and that's exactly what this list is counting down today. The top 10 most fragile Skylanders, based on my own experiences, based on what I've seen from photos and videos around the internet of other people's broken Skylander collectibles. For number 10 on the list, I really wanted to put Fiesta. He just seems like a figurine that's begging to be broken with how flimsy and thin all of his joints are, especially that head. Like, as I bobble it back and forth, it just looks like it's about ready to pop off anytime soon. And then the arm joints are rather top-heavy because of that trumpet, so I could see that joint so easily snapping with enough force having been put into it. But when it comes to Fiesta, I don't even think he's the most fragile supercharger, which is why he isn't on this list. I haven't ever seen any examples of him being broken. But Splat, on the other hand, she is absolutely our true number 10 slot because I've seen her without her head. I have seen this paintbrush snapped off far too many times because it's so thin and so maneuverable that all it's going to take is a little bit of loosening up and movement in order to completely dislodge it altogether. Like, seriously, look at that movement as I move about. That flexibility always leads to the figurine being broken, and of course that proves its fragileness. You've got to be incredibly careful when handling the Splat, and this weapon in particular, because enough force being put onto either the weapon or of course its joint at the arm or the paintbrush itself is going to lead to that snapping right off, making Splat easily one of the most fragile Skylanders figurines, giving her number 10 on this here list, mind you. So no doubt for the number 9th spot you're wondering why you can see all 18 Trapmasters before you. Well, it has nothing to do with the Trapmaster sculpts themselves. After all, they are rather large sculpts, so for the most part they are very well constructed, since larger parts have pieces that more easily and smoothly connect together, so to say, and you can have stronger glues for them because you have a larger surface area to work with. So what I'm generally saying here is that the larger, more detailed figures are harder to break apart because they're a lot more sturdy, and the Trapmasters are a fine example of that, with the actual physical molds themselves being very strong and sturdy, to be saying the absolute minimum. But their weapons, on the other hand, I have seen no end of Trapmasters without their iconic Traptanium Weapons, and that's where we find ourselves at the number 9 slot. Not the Trapmasters themselves, but rather the Traptanium Weapons reaches number 9 on the list purely because of how easily they can be snapped off, loosened up, or generally just detached from a figurine. I've saw no end of not fist bumps. I've seen no end of wallops without his hammer, no end of head rushes without her horns, of course. Gusto is missing his boomerang in the fit picture you see before you, alongside several other weapons having been lost, like Tough Luck's blades, and then on top of that, Lobstar, I have seen examples of his stars having been dislodged. So overall, the Traptanium weapons are really fragile pieces that can be far too easily removed and, damage the overall aesthetic of these Trapmaster figurines. So I decided to throw them all in under one slot because they're all of the same part that seem to have the exact same defect, and that is them being far too easy to loosen up, despite the base molding themselves having some really sturdy and well-connected joints that ensure that you ain't snapping these superglued models apart, so to say. For Bash and Walmart bash over here, or should I say Tesco bash, because that's the UK equivalent of Walmart, but as I digress, everyone's favourite phrase that I haven't seemed to need to use every single video. When it comes to these figurines, they often have the same defect in the fact that people have managed to completely remove their tails. So I suppose it's because, as you can tell, their joints are rather flimsy, so with enough force you could definitely snap that bad boy right off. It makes me fearful every single time I grip them, in case they just kind of like pop right off for me, even with minimal efforts. And my original bash actually had his tail removed by, of course, myself playing with him a little too roughly. But fortunately, I had a friend who took better care of his Skylanders, and when he grew out of the franchise, he gave me his Series 1 bash for free, so I could replace him and get a, you know, far more glorious looking figurine. Because I tell you what, that tail brings a lot more intimidation to the figure. Without that tail, Bash doesn't look merely as menacing of a presence as he does with it. You know, it's a Skylander that you really want to play as, because he looks really powerful with that tail that bashes people. You know, it's literally incorporated into his name. So, you know, once he loses that, he loses a lot of his character, his personality, and you really lose the motivation to play as him. So that's what makes breaking these figurines so devastating, and it becomes far too easy with the tails. But so long as you're careful with them and don't treat them horribly and don't pull on them too hard, and these tails aren't the easiest thing to break, despite the fact that some people have still managed that, as you can see from the photos before you, with Slobber Tooth being the fine example of a tail having been broken off. But clearly enough has been said about these two. They have earned the number 8 spot for the most fragile Skylander figures, and that's about it, really. So coming in at number 7, we have Sprocket, which you would think I would be referring to the Series 1 iteration, considering that she has really thin arm joints, and this spanner just looks like it's ready to pop out at any time, especially if you put some force into it, wearing away for glue and all. But that's not the character that's on the list whatsoever, because instead his Series 2 counterpart is on here, because I have no idea how the person in this photo managed to completely dislodge Sprocket's figurine entirely from a tank, but they managed it all the same. And now that I'm handling it for myself, I can, you know, kind of see why they managed that. I mean, you heard that click right there. That shows that the glue is very easily worn away from circular movement like this, and so you can easily grind her in and pop her out. And since the whole figurine gives you the idea and the illusion that it can't be broken, because of course you have this tank that's rather bulky and very sturdy, you're not breaking this thing with how well constructed it is. For large parts, and the super glue are just very well constructed and give that feeling of sturdiness similar to that of the Trapmasters. So that would give you the idea that perhaps you could, of course, play around rough with the top half of Sprocket, because perhaps that's as sturdy and well constructed as the rest of the figurine, the tank below her, mind you. But you'd be wrong, because you could so easily pop her straight out of it and snap her back, as long as you put enough force into it and really wear down upon that glue and just move the figurine around in ways that it wasn't supposed to, hence why that glue would be weighed down. And of course, if you keep her somewhere warm, then it would also be melted, so that would also make it far easier to dislodge. But then again, you can say the same for any Skylander figurine. It just so happens that most figurines aren't as fragile as this one, hence why it's number 7 on the list right here. Despite the fact that Alec Windmiller's Series 2 Igniter is tragically Despite the fact that Alec Windmiller's Igniter is tragically missing his arm, I have no idea how he did that, by the way, but regardless of how he did it, that's not for Skylander. That's going to be at number 6 right here, because instead we have Igniter. For once, this is a list where I'm glad he's not number 1, because having a fragile figure is not so glorious. And the main problem with this character is that his sword is far too easily broken. Like, seriously, look how flexible and flimsy that is. That is just asking to be broken off. And on top of that, the super glue on this here portion of his fiery helmet isn't the strongest. I've actually managed to completely dislodge it in the past with my original figurine, so this is actually a replacement I found at a pre-owned store that had, of course, the fire and a not so snapped off sword, because I've managed to do that also just with how flexible it is. And that's mostly just because it's a large, thin sheet of plastic, and those are normally very well easily bent. And when you can bend plastic, it wears it down and makes it very easy to snap off. So naturally, that's what makes Igniter here such a fragile figure, specifically his Series 1 version, which I myself have experienced and haven't broken before. So yes, this is a tragedy, but it doesn't take away how glorious Igniter is. So that's why, for once, I am glad he is much lower on a list. Number 5 is yet another figurine that I can speak from experience is absolutely fragile, since my cousin managed to break off both his arms by pushing them in a direction like that, far apart from the way that the creators of the figurine intended, and that meant that they were easily dislodged due to the fact that A, they weren't meant to go in that direction, and, B, when they were being constructed, I assumed that the glue for the shoulder joints wasn't the most effective in utilization, because they can pop right out due to glue just generally being weighed down by the sheer weight of these arms, because these joints would have to deal with the weight of that arm and that crystal right there. So a combination of that glue being worn down by the weight and the poor construction of the figurine, as well as the movement of the arms in the complete opposite direction in which the joint was intended, just makes it very, very fragile. So I definitely don't recommend putting on Prism Break's arms too much. You don't want to break such a glorious figurine, mind you. Next up is Series 2 Chop Chop. Yet again, we have a flimsy arm, which comebacks to the theme of these guys being far too easily broken and far too fragile, as the joint here can just pop right out. I'm just going to let the clip from the following Skylanders hunting video speak for itself as to why Chop Chop here is number 4 on the list.
Can make people travel through dimensions. Broken Chop Chop. Yeah, that's actually the very first ever story score we get from Spice Adventure. Yeah, that Chop Chop looks a little broken to me. Yeah, but it looks like they got exactly the same stuff as the last episode, guys. You know, they got traps and stuff hidden behind Hothead, but it's all stuff I already have, unfortunately. Hey, Aaron. These are what? It's a trap. I will trap you in a minute. What? Wait, who just fixed it? Oh. Ed, did you just fix Chop Chop? Nice job, Ed. That was broken a minute ago. Oh. Yeah, that's a shame. Either way, we got Skylanders over here. Oh, wow. They have sails after all. Guys, I wouldn't expect them to have sails, but they actually have sails for once.
I broke Chop Chop again.
Oh, he broke it again. How do you manage that?
Sorry, Chop Chop. It was by accident.
Well done, dude.
Next up, we have Series 1 Chill. Now, with Chill, there's very little connection to the base itself. The arms are just narrowly joined to the rest of the body with a lot of weight and thin sheets of plastic is what I'm trying to say, making it awfully flexible. Like, seriously, when you push down this arm, it's not only the arm that moves, the entirety of the top half moves as well. So this figurine is just asking to be snapped into. And on top of that, I've not only seen pre-owned stores with Chill that has no arm, but Chill without a head as well. So naturally, you could bring her down to nothing but feet on a base, and I'm sure some people would be competent enough to snap the feet right off the base as well, with just how flimsy they alone feel and how little they are connected to the base. They're just simply, glued down by either foot. There could have been so much more added to the base to make it a lot more structured, similar to that of Zap, who has, of course, the waves and the higher, bigger base and all, to, of course, give his feet that stronger connection. And he's also glued to the base and all 4, so that helps for sure. Coming in at number 2 is Flashwing. Now, when you see this figurine, the first thing you want to do is play about with the wings. They're fragile enough to create a small plane of movement, and she's a gem dragon. Normally, dragons can fly, so, you have a new toy. You want to play with a toy. You want to flap its wings up and down, but what you don't realise is that this is one of the most fragile parts of any Skylander out there, because Flashwing's wings, well, they break off so easily to where she's no longer Flashwing anymore. She's just Flash for, I want to say, 50% of the Flashwings I've ever seen in pre-owned stores. Like, seriously, sometimes the wing is so unsturdy and fragile that it breaks off in the packaging. Yeah, Flashwing is just notoriously one of the most easily Skylanders to break, so if you have a broken Flashwing, don't blame yourself. It's a poor construction of a figurine with just how little connection there is between that wing and the body. There's just a small little cut inside the body that allows the wing to slip right in with a minimal amount of super glue. So yes, this is a far too fragile piece, and it makes Flashwing's wings far too easily broke off to, again, leave us with nothing but Flash. But coming in at number 1, we have easily the most notoriously fragile Skylander, that being the Series 1 Hex, that most of the time can have an arm missing. both arms missing or even a head missing on top of that, and that's purely because if you can tell as I maneuver this hex right here that her parts are just so flexible and they're so thin and yet so heavy at the same time that they can just easily wear down and pop out of their sockets. So naturally, hex, when it comes to how many people actually have her in a pristine condition such as myself, it's a very small majority. I'm willing to bet that there are more broken hexes out there than what there are perfect condition hexes. Even ones in the box have the tendency to snap off. So hex is just so poorly constructed from a figurine standpoint. They definitely needed more structure and strength put into those arm joints, and of course the head as well, to make her far less flexible and far less easily broken, because she's a toy. As a support master, we want to play as her as a toy, but if we dare try to do such a thing, if we dare drop this figurine in the wrong way, then we risk losing both her arms. And this isn't the only hex that has the problems in her construction, because of course Series 2 hex, you can easily pop off these skulls right here, since sure they're glued down, but they don't have any like slits cut into hex's dress in order to make sure that they're slotted in. They're just glued down instead. And on top of that, her arms are both carrying a skull now, so that doesn't really help with the weight adjustment. As you can tell, it's still incredibly flexible, and those arms are going to be far too easily to snap off with just how thin the plastic is. And I even have experience with breaking off her Lightcore figurine's arm. I unfortunately cannot show you the replacement I got because I left at my university accommodation, but believe me, my original Lightcore hex lost her arm all the same. In fact, whilst I certainly don't have the complete Lightcore hex that I alluded to at the end of this here top 10, with of course all of her parts attached, because it's at university, or my university accommodation more specifically for my being. What I can show you on the other hand is the broken version I have that had to get replaced. As you can tell, her arm is missing because it came straight out, and the shoulder joint was incredibly flexible, and one day I just put her in a drawer with other Skylanders and must have accidentally dropped something onto her arm and snapped it straight off. I have tried super gluing it several times, but it's just a no-go. That arm is remaining completely dislodged from the rest of the figurine right now, just because it's so fragile and poorly constructed, as the same with her original figurines. So, if there's one tradition that carried over from Spyro's Adventure into Giants, it's that Hex has always been the most fragile Skylander, and far too easily broken at that. But that does it for this here top 10. I hope you guys enjoyed the top 10 most fragile Skylanders figurines. I think for that was most certainly a really creative idea, and I really enjoyed discussing about these Skylanders, and of course giving you a fair warning as well. Whilst they are toys, they are fragile toys at that, so if you want to keep your Skylanders in a good condition, be careful with them and treat them with respect. But with that being said and done, thank you guys so much for watching. I will of course be seeing you in the next one, and until it memorizes, peace. I wanted to end off this clip with a little bit of a bonus as to the inspiration behind this here top 10, and it comes from this broken Series 1 robot I just so happened to have in my possession because my friend was a little too brutal whilst playing with his wings and snapped it straight off. But luckily for me, since this is only my friend's spare which he gave to me, my original robot all the way back from 2012 when I first bought him is still in that perfect pristine condition. So that just goes to show that so long as you're careful with Drobot, you can't really break him. But just as I thought this was the worst way you could treat a Drobot, I found this image on the internet about someone who was even more rough with his Skylanders than my friend was. So ultimately, kind of surprised Drobot didn't make the list after seeing that, ain't ya? But as I said, I think that's just one kid being ridiculously rough, and the Drobot figurine itself is barely just non-fragile enough to have barely scraped, not getting on the list, mind you. But if there was 11 slots, I guarantee you he would have been the 11th right now. But regardless, let's get this perfect Drobot out of the way, because this whole video has been centralized around broken Drobots, such as this one before you, because man, that looks rough. He even tried to glue it back on. But regardless, no doubt you guys noticing this little Horizon TV in the background right here. That's because when this video goes live, I will be in the middle of a live stream for Horizon Zero Dawn. So definitely switch on over and check me out on there. I'd love to see all of you over there so we can all interact and have some good fun with one another as I die several times over to no doubt the same part of the video game. Because, man, I'm notoriously bad at video games and I will take ownage of that. So you can meme the heck out of it. But for now, I want to truly end off this video with all bonuses aside. So yes, thanks again for watching.